Yasas. This is an essay that I wrote called Views on Personhood. Many times, when people attempt to plead for mercy, usually for criminals, but even for the innocent, they'll say, "But he's a human being." What does this mean? Most people consider person and human to be interchangeable concepts, but I do not, and believe there are differences in how each should be treated. In this essay, I will explain these. For me, the term human is purely biological. It describes the genetic makeup of our species. Regardless of whether or not I'm a person, I am still a human. Even a fetus, once it reaches a certain point of development, cannot become anything else but human. But I do not believe that this qualifies us for special treatment or consideration. We are certainly not on the endangered species list, nor is there anything remarkable about us to make us better than any other animal in the grand scheme of things. In fact, if we were to look at things from an environmental perspective, our species is the only one which has the potential to dramatically change the world around us in an extremely short period of time. We have done this throughout our evolutionary history. Some of these changes have been positive, but most have been negative. One might say that humans are separated from animals because we can talk, think, and act. To some degree, this is true, as I have demonstrated with our influence in the world. But we are not the only intellectual beings, nor are we the only ones which can talk and/or which possess language of some form. Yet, unlike our genetic makeup, which is permanent, I cannot wake up and decide to become a cat. We can slip in and out of personhood. In order to be a person, one must be sentient. Wikipedia defines sentience as the ability to feel, perceive, or be conscious, or to have subjective experiences. 18th century philosophers used the concept to distinguish the ability to think, reason, from the ability to feel, sentience. Yet this is not enough to qualify for personhood. By that token, most animals would be people. The ability to reason is also important. A being becomes a person when he can not only think and express himself, but do so in a meaningful way. He has an awareness of his own unique identity, of his likes and dislikes, not only as a species, but as an individual. I know not to eat tree bark or rocks. Even the lower animals can determine what is edible and what is not. Some do it by trial and error, while others do it by instinct. Unlike many animals, I may choose to eat chicken and not beef, or squash and not carrots, whereas another person might decide to skip meat entirely. Even though he cannot explain himself to us in ways that we can understand, the dog can do the same thing by adopting a given toy as his favorite, or choosing a particular brand or type of food. Those animals which go purely by instinct only hunt and eat specific animals and/or plants. Unlike the status of being a human, one is not born a person. This is something which develops over time. So, to use my example above, the baby might very well put the rock or the tree bark into his mouth as an exploratory exercise, and upon trying it would then discover that it's not edible. Of course, as adults, we understand this, which is why we grant children protection from harmful things. Even when they become old enough to walk and talk, we do not expect them to be able to make the same kinds of decisions as adults, as their brains have not developed and they have not had enough experiences to be able to determine what is right and wrong. They are, in essence, still growing into their personhood. So a 5, a 10, and an 18-year-old have each reached a different stage of development. Once the brain fully matures, even though the individual will hopefully continue learning new things throughout the course of his life, he has attained full personhood, as he now has the proper mentality to handle most daily situations, and many unexpected ones as well. While a person can't change from human to something else, he can lose his personhood, and in some cases, never attain it. In the first instance, someone who has either become a person or who is in the process of doing so suffers some injury to the brain or traumatic experience which prevents the ability to think, feel, and/or act rationally. he may be halted in a particular stage of development or regress to a specific point, or even all the way back to non-personhood. Depending on the severity of the situation, he may or may not be able to recover. The second instance is one in which a human never attains personhood, or only reaches a very low level. As with the first, this may be due to trauma, but is usually due to a mental illness or disorder of some kind. Most of these either cannot recover or can only make slow progress to a certain point. There is one more instance, which is a mixture of the two. That is, someone who has seemingly reached personhood on some levels, but not others. He can reason most of the time, or can feel things, but is prone to erratic, sometimes violent behavior. Depending on whether they are able to control themselves naturally, these humans may or may not qualify as people. Note that mood swings, so long as there is no serious violence towards others involved, do not detract from personhood. All of these situations, depending on their severity, require different approaches. In the case of those who develop reasoning skills, if they are mildly to moderately retarded, the first case meaning that they can live alone but are slow, and the second meaning that they may need help but are like older children, it's important to let them be as independent as possible, to teach them the value of work, sharing, and being part of a community. In cases in which the individual cannot learn or do anything, has lost so much mental ability that he can no longer function on acceptable level, and where recovery is not possible, or cannot control violent tendencies and may be a potential threat to society, euthanasia is best. One may then wonder about euthanizing children. After all, when they're born, they can't think, reason, or make decisions. This argument is not only biologically ridiculous, as we would then eliminate our entire species, but also pointless, since most children can, in fact, develop into people. But this is not to be confused with aborting fetuses, which haven't even developed into humans, unless we're discussing partial births, which I do not support. I must also stress that, just because children are still developing into people, this does not mean that they should be discriminated against or treated as non-persons. Now that I have discussed the mental loss of personhood, I shall explain the legal one. This is quite important, as it is the basis behind my philosophy on torture and the death penalty. One of my favorite adages is the punishment should fit the crime, but it must also fit the type of person who did it. If a 5-year-old is told by his big brother to go and throw eggs at someone's car, and that he will be given candy as a reward, that's quite different from a teenager or adult doing the same thing. The child may know that it's bad, but may not be mentally competent enough to resist the temptation of the candy. Even if he is, if he loves and trusts his brother, he may see him as a role model and believe that whatever he says is right. So he won't question the behavior, even though he knows it's wrong. In the case of the teenager or adult, there are no such vulnerabilities. A 12 or 13-year-old, at 12 or 13, one is clearly old enough to know, even under clear peer pressure, that this is not an acceptable thing to do. This, of course, is a light example, but the same thing could hold true for a child versus an adult stealing, punching someone, etc. Once a person reaches a certain age, things that were acceptable at 2 or 3 are no longer seen as cute or funny or innocent. Yet none of this would lead to a loss of personhood. That only happens in extreme situations, such as rape, murder, not in self-defense, not killing in self-defense, and serious abuse of children, the disabled, the elderly, or animals. Any truly harmful crime involving children is an automatic reason to strip one of personhood. Once this happens, we're merely dealing with a biological human being, but since he was once a person capable of thought and reason, it can be deduced that he knowingly and willingly committed these crimes. Therefore, he can be tortured and or executed. Even though some animals may reach a level of personhood, it is not appropriate to do this to them, as they don't understand our laws and are mostly acting out of instinct or self-defense. The same holds true for those who never attained or who biologically lost their personhood, as they can no longer reason. In conclusion, being a person and being a human are two different things. While they may at times overlap, they each have their own defining characteristics. Therefore, using one's humanity as an excuse for mercy pleas will not change my mind on a given topic. But if he has attained personhood, it just might.